You probably have been in a situation like this before. You are stuck in the bot lane farming, but your solo laners are hopelessly feeding, putting your team at a major disadvantage. And we all know that even a fed AD carry can get one-shot by an 0-3 top laner, so in this situation it will be even worse. However, Ezreal brings unique qualities to the table that allow him to deal with a situation like this much more consistently than other bot laners. The combination of his mobility, his range, and his semi-defensive itemization allows you to still have agency and carry potential even when you draw the short end of the stick with your teammates. I'm going to show you exactly how you need to use Ezreal's kit to clutch out games like this in just a second, but his runes and items are a huge contributing factor as well, so let's address them first. The rune page you should be using every single game is Press the Attack, Presence of Mind, Legend Bloodline, and Coup de Grace with Magical Footwear and Biscuit Delivery secondary. Press the Attack is the best Ezreal keystone by far. Yes, some people still use Conqueror, but Press the Attack does much of the same things, but it does them better early game. Conqueror has almost no impact in lane, whereas Press the Attack has huge burst damage on a single target, which is a big deal in a perpetual 2v2 situation. In the late game as well, Press the Attack is arguably just as strong as Conqueror. Well, yes, Conqueror does give you some healing and it does increase damage against all targets essentially in a longer fight, but Press the Attack deals so much upfront damage and has such a low internal cooldown that it can compete with Conqueror even in the late game. However, having early game agency is so crucial in today's meta as the game is so fast paced. Always pick Press the Attack, it is your best chance to win. Presence of Mind is pretty much self-explanatory. There was a phase in which Ezreal could take Triumph here, while Essence Reaver was the main build. It is not anymore, as you will see, but while Essence Reaver was at its peak, Presence of Mind was a little bit superfluous after the early game. However, in today's meta, Presence of Mind is by far the best choice. You will need your mana to spam all your spells, and spellcasting is really the main source of damage for Ezreal. Legend Bloodline is also self-explanatory, as the other Legend runes don't really give him much, and Bloodline especially allows you to have more item flexibility. As you will see in a second, Ezreal buys very little lifesteal, if any, in his item build, but Legend Bloodline makes that irrelevant. You will still heal with your Qs and your auto attacks, even though you're buying a little bit more unique items. Now, Coup de Grace in the next row is more like a default choice, as Ezreal doesn't really have any special synergies with the other options here. A straight up damage increase on low health targets, however, where it matters most, is a solid choice for any champion. Magical Footwear is great for every AD carry, since 300 golds saved by not buying boots are essentially a 300 gold discount on your first item. On Ezreal, this is strong in particular because he doesn't really need boots early anyway. He has his E for mobility, so he can escape sticky situations even with minimal movement speed. Biscuit Delivery is mandatory as well because, as I've mentioned, Ezreal relies on his spells at all stages of the game, and Biscuit Delivery fixes your early mana, which is crucial since you don't start with Tyr, you start with Doran's Blade. Now, Ezreal's item build has been more and more optimized over time, and it's a very intricate one. Yes, you buy Tear of the Goddess on your first base, but your first completed item is Trinity Force. Ezreal's Q is perfect with Sheen effects, of course, because it both triggers and applies it in one single spellcast. Trinity Force is currently the best Sheen item there is for Ezreal, and it gives all the best stats as well. The ability haste is particularly strong here, but also the damage he deals over time with ramping AD. And while casting spells is at the core of this champion's playstyle, auto attacks are also nothing to scoff at. Ezreal still has a 550 auto range, which is good average for AD carries, and with Trinity Force's attack speed and scaling damage, the enemy can't even effectively hide behind minions anymore. Just auto attacking when you can get in range is perfectly viable with this champion, especially taking your passive into account. Now, after finishing Trinity Force, you should be finishing Manamune. At this point, you should have acquired a lot of tier stacks already, because as soon as you get this component item, you can spam Q in lane like nothing else. Ezreal struggles a little bit with wave clear, but once you can start spamming Q and don't really get punished for your mana, you can control the lane better and also start stacking right away. Two birds with one stone essentially. Cooldown reduction boots are also a no-brainer because lower cooldowns means more Q spam. Also your E-spell, which is especially crucial both offensively and defensively, will be up more often with this item, and you will see how massively impactful E is in the analysis. Cyrilda's Grudge is another easy choice because every AD carry needs a Last Whisper item at some point since base armor scales so heavily with champion levels. Cyrilda's Grudge does of course come with more cooldown reduction, but also the slow is especially good on Ezreal. Landing just one Q with a slow means you can land subsequent Qs very easily because the enemy just can't move anymore. Your fifth item should always be Frozen Heart, and I really mean always. Full AP teams essentially do not exist, so the armor will always be valuable. On top of that, the item provides a massive 20 ability haste as well, further supporting your playstyle, and also the mana it provides feeds into Manamune's effects. You get more on hit damage, on spell damage, and raw attack damage. A hyper efficient purchase. As I've said, Ezreal's build is very streamlined and optimized, but the last slot is still flexible. Ravenous Hydra, for example, is generally good in most cases, providing massive ability haste and also some extra lifesteal, but Maw of Malmortius is very strong against AP damage dealers, whereas Guardian Angel will help you against assassins like Rengar and Kha'Zix. Also, there are niche cases in which the enemy is heavily relying on healing, but your team still hasn't bought any healing reduction, and there Kempunk Chainsword will save your game. In any case, here's how Ezreal's phenomenal qualities get accentuated by these runes and items. Ezreal actually gets cheesed right from the start level 1 from this bush from the enemy Nautilus. This is the exact reason why early game focused rune pages are so crucial. If you can't deal damage back in a situation like this, you just lose the lane on the spot. But with the press the attack page and the damage Ezreal deals to Nautilus, he's actually fine despite getting cheesed. Of course, it also helps that Ezreal is, generally speaking, a rather safe AD carry. He can stay far in the back and farm with Q, which means Nautilus has very little opportunity to catch him. Ezreal can safely farm. Yes, being pushed under tower isn't nice, but he can still stay safe and get his CS, even though the enemy might get some tower damage. However, in this matchup especially, Ezreal has to be a little bit more aggressive. You cannot allow Kai'Sa to scale for free. You have to fight back, you have to deal some damage and apply pressure. Kai'Sa in the late game is super dangerous, even more dangerous than Ezreal arguably, so you have to try to make that early game count, or else she will just run all over your team. Nonetheless, in a game like this, the lane phase will be anything but easy, especially if your jungler then goes ahead, tries to counter jungle, but only ends up feeding the enemy support a red buff. Additionally, after the base, there's a huge wave on the line, but Ezreal finally bought the first strong component item, which is Sheen. He's able to absolutely maul that Kai'Sa with this in combination with Braum's passive, and of course fighting in an enemy wave is always risky since the minions deal so much damage, so he will go down eventually here, but not without picking up a double kill due to his aggressive plays. I cannot stress enough how important it is to play aggressively against a late game scaling AD carry. You have to make use of that early game to keep them as small as possible for as long as you can. Of course, this won't always work, especially if the game goes long, because then they're essentially guaranteed to scale, but you have to try to minimize their win conditions. And while Nautilus adds insult to injury here, trying to put the already losing solo lanes even further behind, which is moderately successful for him, this at least allows Ezreal to get some free tower platings and zone Kai'Sa away from the wave, which is huge to secure the late game. The longer you can prevent this Kai'Sa from getting her items, the better. All of this leads to Ezreal acquiring his first important power spike, Triforce, rather quickly, and leads to him taking the first tower as well. All according to plan, Kai'Sa is slightly behind, well, the rest of Ezreal's team are behind compared to their counterparts, but Ezreal is able to buy his team some time now. In the mid game he will have to deal with the fed enemies in the solo lanes and the jungle, which makes life for him rather difficult, but you have to keep in mind he's still an Ezreal. He can stay deceptively safe, he has a disengage spell with his E, and he can deal huge damage with his Qs and his ultimate from max range. And yes, Lilia actually is able to sneak in a dragon here before dying, which is nice, it's something. In any case, equipped with Triforce and with Press the Attack, Ezreal can now deal huge damage while also staying safe behind this wall. Look at how he kites this, well, not kiting is almost the wrong word, how he attacks the enemy team, only jumping forward when they're low enough so he can snag the kill. Staying completely safe, they're unable to touch him, but Ezreal can just keep going, jumping in when it's appropriate, and biding his time when it's not. This is a huge play for blue team and a big shutdown for Ezreal after that situation. Also important for keeping your team's morale high, by the way, a very crucial aspect of solo queue. And Ezreal's safety comes clutch in many different situations. For example, farming under tower is really your only option when you're behind, but in a situation like this, look at this dive the enemy tried to set up there. Any other AD carry would just die there, but Ezreal, he can use his E to buffer the Nautilus hook and then he's essentially good to go. And as difficult as it is for the enemy to punish Ezreal's positioning, as easy it is for him to punish the opponent's positioning mistakes. Nautilus is slightly out of position there, but as the team jumps in, Ezreal just jumps forward as well and Nautilus dies within seconds. So blue team are still under a lot of pressure, as you can see from the minimap. They're currently losing their bot lane inhibitor, mid lane's getting pushed in as well, but they're going for a very interesting cross-map play. They're essentially, for a chess analogy, they're essentially trading pieces. They're trading their towers for a Baron, which is a short-term gain for a long-term loss essentially. It is a smart move because they're not able to contest the enemy 5v5 at this point, but they're still able to get some mileage regardless. They don't have to seek the confrontation, they can play more passively and gain the objective advantage that way. However, the enemy is starting to show signs of frustration, making foolish mistakes, actually leading this Baron to much more of an advantage than it should be. And I know I said Kai'Sa would outscale Ezreal in the late game, which is true, but Ezreal's late game is not bad either. He has a bunch of cooldown reduction, which means he can just spam his Q when he hits them for the cooldown reset, allowing him to deal massive damage for as long as he can keep going. Yes, he is a little bit overcommitted here, takes a bunch of damage back as a result, but it still would have been fine if it weren't for the Karthus ultimate. Of course, you can't dodge this one no matter your positioning, so you need to plan a little bit ahead. But the fight was overall still very good for blue team, of course, even though Ezreal will go down here. And the point I mentioned earlier about punishing enemy positioning mistakes, it's almost like a Tristana. Just look at this incredible burst damage. Nautilus can't do nothing. In the late game, and we're approaching late game territory by now, Ezreal's single target DPS is phenomenal, especially with press the attack. Now Ezreal is in a decent position to carry in principle, but red team still has a major advantage, especially because blue team's top laner is a Renekton, an early game champion who failed the early game, and now they're kinda starting to lose objectives. By the way, as an AD carry, it is extremely risky to approach a fed late game carrying top laner like that. You are such an easy target for them, especially if they have such great target access. However, Ezreal is a little bit of an exception. Yes, this is still risky, but as you know from the item build, he has some armor in the Frozen Heart components, and he has the mobility with his E-spell. So yes, this still looks dire, but he is able to distract Yone a little bit, and he doesn't even die as a result. So all good-ish, kind of. But yeah, plays like these would be impossible with any other AD carry, and even with Ezreal, it is arguably safer to just stay very far out of Yone's range in that situation. Though admittedly, he does end up dying for this greed, so good on him. Blue team's base is still in shambles here, but at least Ezreal is able to fend off the Kled who tries to backdoor while his team can take Baron as a result of Yone's greed. It's a rough match nonetheless. Blue team has taken little towers by now, despite getting Baron buff multiple times. But on the other hand, Ezreal has allowed his teammates to catch up a little bit. Yes, it's still the early game, late game mismatch between Renekton and Yone, for example, but a full build Renekton versus a full build Yone is much better than a 3 items Renekton versus a full build Yone. It's quite simple. Okay, Nautilus ends up getting caught again, which means Ezreal can jump forward and punish. You start to see a pattern here, I think. And now the siege should be rather easy. They have Baron buff, they have numbers advantage. Yes, in the top lane it's a little bit iffy, Yone tries to split push, but that means in the mid lane there's complete numbers advantage for blue team. And after taking the inhibitor, they also try to pressure the base towers. I'm not sure if I agree with that play, it's rather greedy. They should just reset and push another lane, top lane for example, or bot lane. But they ended up getting some damage on the base tower and they didn't really pay too much for it. They only lost 1 teleport from their team. Of course, blue team still has to stall here until their inhibitors respawn, but they also can't give the enemy any openings to push in their base further. Ezreal is legit solo carrying fights at this point with his damage, and by now I also hope you realize how he uses his E. When there is numbers advantage, he always flashes and E's aggressively to punish the enemy. If there's numbers disadvantage, he stays safe and E's backwards. However, in this situation, enemy out of position, Ezreal can burst them down, so he goes for that instantly, and removing Kai'Sa, the late game hypercarry, from this fight instantly wins it for his team. As a result, blue team are able to finally make some real progress on the map, taking top lane inhibitor, and they're even able to burst down one of the base towers. However, they're not in position to finish quite yet. The enemy respawned just a little too early, and, well, Yone got a nice ult off, enabling him to shut down Renekton, but Ezreal, as you can see, safe enough with his spells so he can back off before he dies himself. And especially his defensive late-game itemization comes in clutch here. AD carries are usually very squishy at any point in the game, but Ezreal, since he can use Frozen Heart so well, is an exception. Yone has a hard time killing him. Of course, his muscle memory tells him this combo will kill an AD carry from this range, but that's not true for Ezreal. He is deceptively safe not only with his positioning, but also with his stat profile. You also have to keep in mind Trinity Force gives a bunch of HP, which synergizes with Frozen Heart's armor. In any case, speaking of late game itemization, have a look at this fight. Normally, an AD carry is unable to outplay a Karthus ultimate, but, well, see for yourself. The late game Maw of Mimosas was legitimately game-winning for Ezreal here. After surviving Karthus' ultimate with a considerable amount of HP, he was able to muscle through this fight with his damage while his teammates were super low, or in Akali's case even dead. If you want to learn more about consistently winning strategies even though when your team is behind, just click the link on your screen right there.